Case name: the Julia Wallace murder. Location: Liverpool, England. Year: 1931. Primary victims: Julia Wallace, 52, housewife. Primary suspects: William Herbert Wallace, 52, insurance agent, husband. Benchmark sources: trial transcripts, contemporary newspaper accounts, detective novelist Raymond Chandler's analysis. The Man from the Prue, by Jonathan Goodman, British Library Crime Classics Archive. Unique narrative angle: a real 1931 locked room murder so impossible that even Golden Age detective novelists couldn't solve it, where the prime suspect had an alibi that defied physics, yet all evidence pointed to him. The case that blurred the line between detective fiction and reality. Cold open. The parlor door opens at 8:45 p.m. A man stands in the doorway of 29 Wolverton Street, Liverpool, and stares at something that shouldn't exist. His wife is on the floor, her head caved in by 11 savage blows. Blood pools beneath the gas fire. The room has been ransacked, cabinet doors flung open, her handbag torn apart. But here's the problem. According to every witness, every timestamp, every physical law of time and space, the man standing in that doorway couldn't have done this. He was 4 miles away, witnessed by multiple people, riding trams across Liverpool, searching for an address that didn't exist. The door was locked from the inside. No weapon was ever found. No blood on his clothes. No strangers seen entering or leaving. It's January 20th, 1931, the golden age of detective fiction, when Agatha Christie is selling millions, when locked room mysteries are entertainment, puzzles to be solved over tea. But this isn't fiction. This is William Herbert Wallace, a mild-mannered insurance agent, standing in his own home, staring at an impossible crime. Within 48 hours, detectives will call it the perfect murder. Within 3 weeks, he'll be charged. Within 100 years, no one will agree on what actually happened. Dorothy L. Sayers, the legendary crime novelist, will call it unbeatable. Raymond Chandler will be obsessed by it. Judges will overturn juries. And the question remains, can a real murder be too perfect? Because to understand how it got here, we have to go back. The world and the people. Liverpool, 1931. Britain is 3 years into the Great Depression. Liverpool, once the gateway of the British Empire, is hemorrhaging jobs. The docks are quiet. Unemployment is at 25%. Desperation hangs over the terraced houses of Anfield like fog off the Mersey. But 29 Wolverton Street sits in a respectable neighborhood. Narrow brick row house. Lace curtains. A piano in the parlor. The kind of home where people still dress for dinner, even when there's barely money for meat. This is where William and Julia Wallace live. The Wallaces. William Herbert Wallace is 52 years old. Thin. Bespectacled. Methodical. He works for the Prudential Insurance Company, collecting premiums door to door, pennies and shillings from people who can barely afford them. It's grinding work. Humiliating work. But Wallace does it with precision. He's a self-educated man. Reads philosophy. Studies chemistry. Plays chess at the Central Chess Club every Monday night. Neighbors describe him as cold. Detached. Not quite normal. But it's never violent. Julia Wallace is 52 as well. Frail health. Former piano teacher. No children. Those who know her describe a quiet woman, devoted to her husband, living a small, careful life. The marriage seems functional. Polite. Affection in letters, though neighbors rarely see warmth between them. Money is always tight. Wallace keeps meticulous records, every shilling accounted for. Julia manages the house. They take tea together. They play music. They exist in a narrow, controlled routine. On the surface, it's ordinary. But here's what people will remember later. Wallace recently increased Julia's life insurance. He's been asking questions about the value of their possessions. And in recent weeks, he seemed distracted. Monday, January 19, 1931. 7 p.m. Wallace leaves for his weekly chess club meeting at the City Café, North John Street. It's routine. He never misses. 7:15 p.m. The telephone rings at the cafe. Samuel Beatty, the club captain, answers. A man's voice, muffled, hurried, asks for Mr. Wallace. "He's not here yet," Beatty says. The caller leaves a message. Mr. Wallace should come to 25 Menlove Gardens East tomorrow night at 7:30 p.m. A man named R.M. Qualtrough wants to discuss insurance for his daughter's 21st birthday. Beatty writes it down. Wallace arrives at 7:45 p.m., later than usual. Beatty gives him the message. Wallace seems surprised. He doesn't recognize the name Qualtrough. Doesn't know Menlove Gardens East. But business is business. He says he'll go. Tuesday, January 20th, 1931. The day unfolds normally. Wallace makes his insurance rounds. Collects payments. Stops home for lunch with Julia. She seems fine. They discuss the evening appointment. Wallace is anxious about finding the address. Menlove Gardens East is in a neighborhood he doesn't know well. 6:45 p.m. Wallace leaves 29 Wolverton Street. Julia is alive. Several neighbors see him leave, checking tram times, looking preoccupied. He boards a tram heading toward Menlove Gardens. What happens in the next 2 hours will determine whether a man lives or dies. And then, everything changed. The crime. 6:45 p.m., Wolverton Street. William Wallace puts on his hat. Julia helps him with his coat. Neighbors will later testify they heard voices, normal domestic sounds, through the thin walls. He's carrying his insurance ledger. Briefcase. Umbrella. He reminds Julia he'll be late. This Menlove Gardens appointment is across town. She nods. Says she'll keep the fire going. The front door closes. Multiple witnesses see Wallace at the tram stop. He asks a conductor about routes to Menlove Gardens East. Checks his watch. Boards the number 4 tram at 6:49 p.m. He's building a trail. Question: is it deliberate? 7 p.m., inside 29 Wolverton Street. We don't know what happens here. We'll never know for certain. But forensic evidence will later suggest this is the window, between 7 o'clock and 7:15 p.m., when Julia Wallace is murdered. Someone enters the parlor. Julia is there, possibly playing the piano, possibly reading by the fire. She knows this person. How do we know? Because she's turned away from the door. She's relaxed. There's no sign of a struggle leading up to the attack. No defensive wounds on her hands. She trusts whoever is in that room. And then, 11 blows. A heavy object. Probably an iron poker, though it's never found. The first blow likely kills her. The next 10 are something else. Rage? Panic? Performance? Her skull is shattered. Blood sprays across the violin case on the shelf. The gas fire continues burning beneath her. The room is then staged. Cabinet doors pulled open. Julia's handbag emptied. A cash box rifled through. But here's what's strange. £4, a considerable sum in 1931, are left untouched in a vase upstairs. Jewelry is ignored. Wallace's insurance collection money, kept in a jar in the kitchen, isn't taken. The robbery is surface level. Performative. Whoever did this didn't know the house well enough to know where valuables were actually kept. They wanted it to look like someone didn't know. 7:10 p.m., Menlove Gardens. Wallace steps off the tram into an unfamiliar neighborhood. Menlove Gardens. He finds Menlove Gardens North. Menlove Gardens South. Menlove Gardens West. But no Menlove Gardens East. He stops a woman on the street, asks for directions. She doesn't know it. He asks at a newsstand. The owner shakes his head. Wallace's frustration is visible. Witnesses will later describe him as agitated, persistent. He finds 25 Menlove Gardens West, knocks on the door. A man answers. Wallace asks for Qualtrough. No one by that name here. Wallace checks his notebook, apologizes, moves on. 7:25 p.m. He's now walking quickly between streets, stopping strangers. Do you know Menlove Gardens East? Have you heard of a Mr. Qualtrough? A police constable notices him, remembers the anxious man asking for a non-existent address. Wallace even goes into a newsagent's shop on Allerton Road. The owner, Katie Mather, will remember him clearly. He seemed genuinely confused. Kept checking his notebook. 15 minutes of witnessed documented searching. It's 7:40 p.m. now. Wallace gives up. He boards a tram back to Wolverton Street. On the journey home, he says nothing. Stares out the window. What is he thinking? 8:40 p.m., 29 Wolverton Street. Wallace arrives home. He approaches the front door. Tries his key. The door won't open. He tries again, jiggling the handle. Nothing. He walks around to the back entrance, down the alley. The back door is also locked. Now he's knocking. Calling Julia's name. A neighbor, John Johnston, is returning home next door with his wife. They see Wallace in the alley. Have you been out? Johnston asks. Yes, and I can't get in, Wallace says. His voice is strained. Johnston helps him try both doors again. Finally, the back door opens. Wallace will later claim it had been locked, that it suddenly gave way. Investigators will question this. Was it ever really locked? Or was this theater? 8:45 p.m. Wallace enters through the kitchen. The house is dark except for the glow from the parlor. He calls out, Julia? Silence. He moves toward the parlor. Johnston follows behind him. Wallace pushes open the door. And stops. Come and see, he says. His voice is flat. She's been killed. Johnston steps forward. Julia Wallace is on the floor, face down, one arm twisted beneath her. Blood pooled around her head. The fire's still burning. Wallace doesn't touch her. Doesn't kneel down. Doesn't scream. He stands there, hand on the door frame, looking. They've finished her, he says quietly. Johnston will later testify about this moment. He seemed shocked, but controlled. Too controlled. Wallace then does something strange. Instead of calling for help immediately, he goes upstairs. He checks the bedrooms. Opens drawers. Looks in the cash box. They've taken £4, he says when he comes back down. But remember, £4 were left untouched in the vase upstairs. He doesn't mention this. Johnston urges him to call police. Wallace goes to a neighbor's house. His own phone is in the hallway, steps from Julia's body, but he doesn't use it. At 8:50 p.m., the police are called. 9 p.m., the response. Constables arrive first. Then Detective Inspector Herbert Gold. Then Professor John Macfall, the police surgeon. Macfall kneels beside Julia's body. Touches her arm. Checks rigor mortis. He makes a determination that will haunt this case forever. She's been dead about 4 hours, he says. 4 hours. That would mean Julia died around 6 p.m. before Wallace left the house. The timeline tightens like a noose. Wallace is sitting in the kitchen now, still wearing his coat. An officer asks him to recount his evening. He does, methodically. Every tram. Every street. Every person he asked for directions. His account is detailed. Too detailed, some will later say. Like he's rehearsed it. Professor Macfall examines Wallace's clothes under lamplight, looking for blood spatter. Nothing. Not a drop. His hands are clean. His shoes are clean. Wallace killed Julia in that frenzied attack. 11 blows, blood spraying. How is there no trace on him? Inspector Gold walks through the house. The front door shows no signs of forced entry. The back door, no footprints in the yard. No murder weapon was found. The £4 Wallace mentioned are missing, but the cash box wasn't hidden. A burglar would have found the money upstairs. Gold returns to the kitchen. Looks at Wallace. Decides. Mr. Wallace, he says, I'm going to need you to come to the station. Wallace nods. Of course, he says. Anything to help. But here's what the police are already thinking. The door was locked from inside. Julia knew her killer. No one saw a stranger enter or leave. The robbery was staged. Wallace's alibi, this wild goose chase to a non-existent address, is too convenient. And the phone call, the mysterious Qualshro, who summoned Wallace across town the exact night his wife was murdered? That call was made at 7:15 p.m. on Monday night. From a phone box 400 yards from the chess club. At the exact time Wallace was allegedly en route to the club. But there's a problem. 17 witnesses place Wallace on that tram journey, at that chess club, searching those streets. If he killed Julia, he bent time itself to do it. It's impossible. But the alternative, that someone else killed her, staged a robbery, locked the doors from inside, and vanished, is equally impossible. Detective Inspector Gold stands in that blood-soaked parlor and realizes something. This isn't just a murder. It's a locked room mystery. The kind Agatha Christie writes. Except it's real. And someone is dead. And that's when the real nightmare began. The investigation. The first 48 hours. January 21, 1931. Detective Superintendent Herbert Moore takes command of the case. He's a 25-year veteran. Methodical. Old school. He doesn't believe in locked room mysteries, he believes in evidence. And right now, every piece of evidence points to one man. William Herbert Wallace. Moore's theory is simple. Wallace murdered his wife before he left the house, sometime around 6:30 p.m. He staged the robbery, created an elaborate alibi by searching for a fake address, returned home and discovered the body with a witness present to seem innocent. Calculated. Cold-blooded. There's just one problem with this theory. The timeline doesn't work. The timeline problem. Let's walk through it. 6:45 p.m. Multiple witnesses see Wallace leave his house. Julia is alive. Neighbors hear her voice. 6:49 p.m. Wallace boards the tram. The conductor remembers him. 7:06 p.m. Wallace is seen in Menlove Gardens for miles away. 7:15 p.m. A milk delivery boy, Alan Close, knocks on the door of 29 Wolverton Street. Julia Wallace answers. She's alive. Close is certain of the time. He checked the church clock. 6:25 p.m., he'll initially say. Then, under questioning, he adjusts closer to 6:45 p.m. If Julia was alive at 6:45, and Wallace was on a tram at 6:49, that gives him 4 minutes. 4 minutes to return to the house without being seen. Convince Julia to turn her back to him. Bludgeon her 11 times. Change his blood-soaked clothes. Hide the weapon. Stage a robbery. Clean himself completely. Lock the doors from inside somehow. Get back outside and to the tram stop. It's physically impossible. But Superintendent Moore doesn't believe Alan Close. The milk boy. Alan Close is 14 years old. Thin. Nervous. Working class. He delivers milk every evening on Wolverton Street. On January 21st, he tells police, I saw Mrs. Wallace at 6:25 p.m. She took the milk can. She seemed normal. But investigators press him. Are you certain about the time? The boy hesitates. Church bells ring at 6:30. Did he hear them before or after? I'm not sure now. What about the clock at the dairy? Maybe it was later. 6:30? 6:35. By the third interview, Close is confused. It could have been 6:45, he finally says. But here's what detectives notice. The boy's original statement was immediate, unprompted, specific. 6:25 p.m. It's only after police explain the timeline problem that his story shifts. Is he being manipulated? Superintendent Moore's theory, Wallace made the call himself. He left home early on Monday, stopped at the phone box, disguised his voice, then continued to the club. Timeline check. Wallace left home at 7 p.m. on Monday. The call was made at 7:15 p.m. Wallace arrived at the club at 7:45 p.m., unusually late. The phone box is a 5-minute walk from his house. He could have stopped there, made the call, then taken a longer route to the club. But Chess Club secretary Samuel Beatty is certain that wasn't Wallace's voice. He's known Wallace for years. The caller sounded different, younger, strained. Voice analysis doesn't exist in 1931. It's Beatty's word. And Moore doesn't believe him. February 2nd, the arrest. 2 weeks after the murder. Wallace is summoned to the police station. He arrives voluntarily, still cooperative, still methodical. Superintendent Moore sits across from him in the interview room. Mr. Wallace, I'm arresting you for the murder of your wife. Wallace doesn't react. Doesn't shout. Doesn't break down. He simply says, what can I say to such a charge, of which I am absolutely innocent? His calmness will be used against him. At the station, Wallace writes in his diary, "Dreadful calamity. I am absolutely bewildered." Even his private words sound rehearsed. Building the case. The prosecution begins constructing their narrative. Motive: financial desperation. Wallace's insurance job barely covers expenses. Julia's life insurance policy was recently increased. There were rumors, never confirmed, of marital tension. Opportunity: Wallace was alone with Julia until 6:45 p.m. If the Milk Boy's adjusted timeline is correct, he had time. The phone call: Wallace created the Qualtrough alibi himself, calling from the phone box, disguising his voice. The alibi: the frantic search for Menlove Gardens East was performance. Wallace deliberately made himself memorable, asking multiple witnesses for directions, making sure he was seen and remembered. The staging: the fake robbery was clumsy because Wallace didn't want to actually steal from himself. He took a token amount to make it look convincing but left the real money untouched. Lack of emotion: witnesses describe Wallace as eerily calm. No tears. No grief. Just methodical explanations. The locked door: Wallace claimed the doors were locked when he returned. But Johnston, the neighbor, said the back door opened easily when they tried it together. Was Wallace lying about it being locked to create the illusion of an intruder? It's circumstantial. All of it. But it's a lot of circumstantial evidence. The defense fights back. Wallace's defense team, led by Roland Oliver, KC, attacks the prosecution's timeline. They bring in their own medical expert. Professor McFall, the police surgeon, estimated death at 6 p.m., based on body temperature and rigor mortis. But defense expert Professor Robert Bronte disputes this. Body temperature is influenced by the gas fire burning beside her. Rigor mortis can vary by hours depending on circumstances. McFall's estimate is guesswork, not science. Bronte's opinion: Julia died between 7:30 and 8 p.m. when Wallace was witnessed 4 miles away. Suddenly, the medical evidence isn't conclusive. It's contradictory. Then the defense highlights the blood evidence, or lack thereof. If Wallace had bludgeoned Julia 11 times, blood would have sprayed everywhere. Investigators tested his clothes with benzidine, a chemical that detects blood traces invisible to the naked eye. Nothing. They examined the bathroom for signs of washing. Nothing. The drains were checked. Nothing. How does a man commit a frenzied murder and leave zero physical evidence? He couldn't, the defense argues. Because he didn't do it. The alternative theory. Defense presents a different scenario. Someone else made the Qualtrough call. Someone who knew Wallace's routine, knew he played chess on Mondays, knew the club's phone number. That person lured Wallace out of the house. Then, while Wallace was across town building an airtight alibi, the real killer visited Julia. She knew them. Let them in. Turned her back. They killed her. Staged a robbery. Left through the back door. But who? The defense can't answer that. They suggest a few possibilities. Theory 1. A disgruntled insurance client. Wallace collected debts from desperate people. Maybe someone held a grudge. Theory 2. A professional burglar who was interrupted. The staged robbery was actually a real one, abandoned mid-act. Theory 3. Someone with a personal connection to Julia. A secret the Wallaces kept hidden. But there's no evidence for any of this. No suspects. No witnesses seeing anyone else enter the house. Just speculation. The forensic stalemate. As the investigation deepens, contradictions pile up. The weapon, never found. Police search drains, gardens, and the canal. Nothing. Where did it go? The cash box. Wallace said 4 pounds were stolen. But the amount doesn't match the cash box contents from his own records. Was he mistaken? Or lying? The front door. Wallace claimed it was locked. Johnston said it seemed stuck, not locked. The lock showed no defects. So why wouldn't it open? The Macintosh, found beneath Julia's body, a burned, blood-soaked raincoat. It was Wallace's. Why was it there? Defense theory. The killer wore it to avoid blood spatter, then left it behind. Prosecution theory. Wallace wore it, then placed it under her body to contaminate it with her blood and make it seem like someone else used it. The phone box. No fingerprints recovered. The 1931 technology isn't sophisticated enough. Witness reliability: 17 people saw Wallace that night. But memories are fuzzy. Times don't quite align. One witness says 7:10. Another says 7:20. Small discrepancies that create doubt. The class element. Something else enters the case. Something unspoken but powerful. William Wallace is educated. Well-spoken. Middle class in a working-class neighborhood. He reads philosophy. Plays chess. Uses words like abominable and incomprehensible. The police interviewing him are working-class Liverpool detectives. There's friction. Superintendent Moore later writes in his report, Wallace presents as arrogant and detached. His manner suggests superiority and calculation. But is that evidence of guilt? Or just class prejudice? Wallace's solicitor argues the latter. My client is being prosecuted for being intelligent and controlled. In Britain, we don't convict people for having composure. Still, the public is turning. Newspapers run headlines. Chess club killer? The perfect murder. Did insurance man plot wife's death? By March, Wallace is the most hated man in Liverpool. The breakthrough that wasn't. Investigators think they've found the final piece. A witness comes forward, a young woman who saw a man leaving the back alley of Wolverton Street around 8:30 p.m. on the night of the murder. She describes him, tall, thin, wearing a dark coat. It matches Wallace's description. But wait, Wallace was still in Menlove Gardens at 8:30, talking to shopkeepers. The witness is shown a photo lineup. She doesn't pick Wallace. Similar build, she says, but I can't be certain. Another dead end. By April 1931, Superintendent Moore makes his final decision. The case goes to trial. Despite the timeline contradictions. Despite the lack of physical evidence. Despite the medical uncertainty. Moore believes Wallace is guilty. And he believes a jury will too. April 22, 1931, the trial begins. Liverpool Assizes. Mr. Justice Wright presiding. The courtroom is packed, standing room only. Wallace sits in the dock, thin and pale, hands folded. Emotionless. The prosecution lays out their case over 4 days. Every inconsistency. Every suspicious behavior. Every piece of circumstantial evidence. The defense counters with the timeline, the lack of forensics, the medical contradictions. Witnesses are called. Alan Close, the milk boy, takes the stand. What time did you see Mrs. Wallace? Around 6:30. Or 6:45. I'm not completely sure. His uncertainty is damaging. Samuel Beatty testifies about the phone call. It wasn't Mr. Wallace's voice. But under cross-examination, he admits, I only spoke to the caller for a few seconds. And it was a poor connection. Neighbor John Johnston describes finding the body. Mr. Wallace seemed calm. Too calm. He didn't cry. Didn't touch her. Just said, they've finished her. The prosecution rests. The defense calls Wallace to the stand. Wallace testifies. He speaks for 2 hours. Methodical. Precise. He recounts every moment of that night. The tram routes, the streets he walked, the people he asked. He's consistent. But he's also odd. When asked about his marriage, Julia and I had a satisfactory relationship. Satisfactory. Not loving. Not devoted. Satisfactory. When asked about finding her body, I observed she had been struck. I concluded assistance was no longer beneficial. The language is cold. Clinical. Prosecutors pounce. You didn't check if she was breathing? It was evident she was deceased. You didn't kneel beside her? There was nothing to be done. Did you love your wife, Mr. Wallace? The pause. I had great affection for her. Past tense. The jury watches him. 12 men. Working class. War veterans. Fathers. They see a man describing his wife's murder like he's reciting a train schedule. Is he innocent and in shock? Or guilty and detached? Closing arguments. The prosecution's closer is devastating. Ladies and gentlemen, this is not a detective novel. This is not Agatha Christie. This is a real woman, Julia Wallace, who died in terror and agony. And the man who killed her is sitting in that dock. He planned it. He executed it. And he almost got away with it. Almost. But justice demands we see through his performance. The defense responds. The Crown asks you to convict a man with no murder weapon, no blood evidence, no witness, and a timeline that makes his guilt physically impossible. They ask you to ignore science, ignore reason, and convict a man because he didn't cry the way you think he should. That is not justice. That is persecution. The jury deliberates. 1 hour. They return. The foreman stands. Guilty. Wallace shows no reaction. Mr. Justice Wright puts on the black cap. William Herbert Wallace, you have been found guilty of the murder of your wife. You will be taken from here to a place of execution, where you will be hanged by the neck until you are dead. Wallace is led away. Still silent. Still composed. But here's what no one in that courtroom knows yet. This case isn't over. Not even close. Because what happened next would change British legal history forever. Psychological breakdown. The mind of William Herbert Wallace. May 1931. Wallace sits in Wolverton Prison, Liverpool, awaiting execution. The gallows are being prepared. But he's not writing goodbye letters. He's not confessing. He's writing about chess problems. Mathematical puzzles. Philosophical treatises. The prison chaplain visits him daily, searching for remorse, for admission, for anything human. Wallace discusses Schopenhauer instead. Do you have anything you'd like to say? The chaplain asks. Anything to unburden yourself? Wallace looks up from his notebook. Only that I am innocent, and that the investigation was bungled from the start. No emotion. Just statement. The chaplain later writes, I have counseled many condemned men. Some weep. Some rage. Some find God. Wallace does none of these. He exists in a state of intellectual detachment I can only describe as unnatural. But is it unnatural? Or is it exactly who Wallace has always been? The Wallace marriage, what no one saw. Let's go deeper into the relationship. Because everyone focused on the murder, but no one really examined the marriage. William and Julia married in 1914. He was 33. She was 35. Late for that era. Both considered past prime marrying age. They had no children. Julia had health issues that prevented pregnancy. Letters between them, discovered after the murder, show affection. Wallace writes, My dearest girl, I think of you constantly. Julia responds, You are my whole world. On paper, it seems devoted. But neighbors tell a different story. Amy Wallace, William's sister-in-law, later testifies, They were polite to each other. But I never saw warmth. Never saw them touch. It was like watching two lodgers sharing a house. James Caird, a friend, recalls, William talked about Julia like she was a responsibility, not a partner. He'd say, I must get home to Julia, the way you'd say, I must feed the cat. Julia had no friends outside the marriage. She rarely left the house. William controlled the finances, every penny accounted for. She asked permission to buy things. This wasn't unusual for 1931. Wives were often dependent. But there's something else. In the months before the murder, Julia told her sister-in-law, William has been different lately. Distracted. He stays out later. He doesn't talk to me. When pressed, Julia wouldn't elaborate. What was happening? Was Wallace having an affair? No evidence was ever found. Was he planning to leave? No indication. Was he planning something else? The psychology of the perfect murder. Here's where it gets complex. If Wallace did it, and that's still a massive if, what kind of mind plans this? Let's examine the Qualtrough scheme. 1. Make a phone call from a public box, disguising your voice. 2. Create a fake name and fake address. 3. Lure yourself away from the crime scene. 4. Murder your wife in a 15-minute window. 5. Leave zero physical evidence. 6. Stage a robbery that looks real but doesn't actually steal anything valuable. 7. Return home and discover the body with a witness present. 8. Maintain absolute composure under interrogation. If this was Wallace, it required meticulous planning, nerve under pressure, compartmentalization, willingness to brutalize someone he'd lived with for 17 years, confidence he could outsmart police, forensics, and a jury. Psychologically, this fits a profile. Organized offender, plans extensively, controls the crime scene, leaves minimal evidence, narcissistic traits, believes he's smarter than investigators, enjoys the intellectual challenge, emotional detachment, can commit extreme violence without visible remorse. Dorothy L. Sayers, the crime novelist who studied this case, wrote, "If Wallace did it, he's the most dangerous type of killer, the one who murders as an intellectual exercise." But here's the other possibility. What if Wallace's detachment isn't guilt? What if it's trauma response? The innocent man's paradox. Imagine you're Wallace. You come home. Your wife is dead. You're immediately a suspect, because statistically, it's always the husband. You're interrogated for hours. Your grief is measured and found insufficient. You don't cry the right way. Don't speak the right way. Don't act the way people expect. So you're arrested, convicted, sentenced to hang. All because you didn't perform grief correctly. Now imagine you're also someone who's spent a lifetime intellectualizing emotions. A self-educated man who escaped poverty through discipline and control. Someone who learned early that showing vulnerability means weakness. When trauma hits, when the unthinkable happens, you don't break down. You retreat into logic, analysis, chess problems. It's not coldness. It's survival. Psychologist Dr. Robert Britton, who studied the case decades later, writes, "Wallace's behavior is entirely consistent with a schizoid personality, not schizophrenia, but a schizoid temperament. These individuals process emotions intellectually rather than viscerally. Under extreme stress, they become more detached, not less. To observers, this looks like guilt. To the schizoid individual, it's the only way to function." If Wallace was innocent, his own personality condemned him. The jury didn't convict based on evidence. They were convicted based on affect. He didn't seem sad enough. And that's terrifying, because it means an innocent man can be sentenced to death for having the wrong personality. The investigator's obsession. Now let's examine Superintendent Herbert Moore. 25 years on the force. Respected. Thorough. He becomes convinced Wallace is guilty within 48 hours. And from that moment, he stops investigating other possibilities. It's called confirmation bias. Every piece of evidence is interpreted through the lens of Wallace's guilt. Wallace was calm. He's a psychopath. Wallace was detailed in his alibi. He rehearsed it. No blood on his clothes? He's clever enough to hide it. The timeline doesn't work. The witnesses are wrong. Moore ignores alternative suspects. He dismisses the possibility of an intruder. He pressures witnesses, like the milk boy, to adjust their statements. But because Moore is a man of certainty, he doesn't like ambiguity. And this case is nothing but ambiguity. The locked room, the impossible timeline, the missing weapon. It gnaws at him. If Wallace didn't do it, then Moore is facing an unsolvable crime. A random killer who vanished without a trace. But if Wallace did do it, if this is just a clever husband who almost got away with it, then Moore can solve it. Restore order. Get justice for Julia. So he locks onto Wallace. And once a senior detective locks on, the entire investigation follows. Junior officers don't question him. Prosecutors build the case they're given. And suddenly, institutional momentum carries a man toward the gallows. Moore later defends his work. "I followed the evidence." But did he? Or did he follow his need for resolution? The community, spectacle and judgment. Liverpool, spring 1931. The Wallace case becomes entertainment. Music halls make jokes about Qualtro. Street vendors sell pamphlets. The Anfield murder, all the shocking details. Crowds gather outside the courtroom, hoping for seats. When Wallace is convicted, people cheer. This is Britain during the Depression. Unemployment, hunger, desperation. And here's a middle-class man, a man with education, with a position, accused of murdering his wife for insurance money. It's schadenfreude. The public wants him to be guilty. Because if someone like Wallace, controlled, respectable, better than them, can fall, it levels the playing field. But there's also something darker. The case taps into deep anxieties about marriage. How well do you really know your spouse? What happens behind closed doors? Julia Wallace seemed like an ordinary housewife. William seemed like an ordinary husband. And then, 11 blows to the skull. If it could happen to them, it could happen to anyone. The case becomes a mirror. Everyone projects their fears onto it. The media, narrative over truth. Newspapers in 1931 don't have ethics boards. They have circulation wars. The Liverpool Echo runs daily updates, each more sensational than the last. Chess club slayer's secret life, hinting at affairs that were never proven. Julia's final moments of terror, speculating about her psychological state with no evidence. Wallace, monster or mastermind? Framing it as a binary when the truth is neither. The News of the World commissions an artist to create courtroom sketches. Wallace is drawn with shadowed eyes. Thin lips. A gaunt, sinister figure. He doesn't look like that in real life. But the illustration sells papers. Crime novelist Edgar Wallace, no relation, writes an op-ed. This is the work of a fiendish intellect. A man who killed without passion, only calculation. He deserves the rope. Public opinion hardens. By the time the verdict comes in, Wallace has already been convicted in the court of public opinion. The jury just makes it official. Julia, the forgotten victim. In all the focus on Wallace, on the locked room, on the impossible timeline, Julia Wallace disappears. She becomes a plot device. A body. A chess piece in an intellectual puzzle. But she was a person. I am 52 years old. Former piano teacher. I love music. Had health problems that kept her homebound. She lived a small life. A quiet life. She had no children. Few friends. Limited independence. Whatever happened in that parlor, whether her husband killed her or a stranger did, she died in terror. 11 blows. The first probably killed her. The next 10 were unnecessary. Someone was angry. Or panicked. Or sending a message. Julia never got justice. Because justice became about whether Wallace was guilty. Not about who Julia was, what she suffered, or what she lost. She's buried in Anfield Cemetery. The grave is modest. Rarely visited. Her death became famous. Her life remained invisible. The reframing insight. Here's what changes everything. What if we've been asking the wrong question? For 90 years, people have asked, did Wallace do it? Guilty or innocent? Binary. Puzzle to be solved. But what if the real question is, can we ever actually know? Because this case reveals something uncomfortable about criminal justice. We need certainty. We need resolution. We need someone to blame. But sometimes, rarely, but sometimes, the truth is genuinely unknowable. The evidence is contradictory. The timeline is impossible both ways. The psychology is ambiguous. Wallace could be a psychopath who committed the perfect murder. Or he could be an innocent man with an unfortunate personality, convicted because he didn't grieve correctly. Both narratives fit the evidence. Both are possible. And we may never know which is true. That's deeply unsatisfying. It violates our narrative expectations. In detective novels, the answer is always revealed in the final chapter. But this isn't a novel. This is real. And real life doesn't always resolve. Dorothy L. Sayers understood this. After studying the case for years, she wrote, "The Wallace case is unbeatable because it refuses to conform to the rules. In fiction, I can create locked rooms and solve them. But reality doesn't care about my cleverness. Sometimes, reality is just impossible." That's the true horror of this case. Not the violence. Not the blood. The uncertainty. The fact that a man can be condemned, or a killer can go free, simply because the truth is too tangled to extract. May 18, 1931. Wallace has 11 days until execution. The gallows are ready. The hangman has been notified. Wallace is writing his final letters. Still insisting on innocence. Still composed. His solicitor files one last appeal. The Court of Criminal Appeal, Britain's highest court for criminal cases. It's a long shot. Appeals are rarely granted. Convictions are rarely overturned. But the defense argues something unprecedented. The verdict is unreasonable and cannot be supported by the evidence. Not that there was a legal error. Not that the trial was unfair. But that the jury got it wrong. That the evidence, contradictory, circumstantial, timeline-breaking evidence, cannot support a conviction. May 18th. The Court of Criminal Appeal hears arguments. 3 judges preside. They review the trial transcripts, the medical evidence, the timeline, the phone call, the blood evidence, or lack thereof. They deliberate for 1 day. And then, they do something that's never been done before in a murder case. They overturn the conviction. Not because Wallace is innocent, but because the case against him is too uncertain. The presiding judge reads the decision. The case against Wallace is built entirely on circumstantial evidence. That evidence is, at best, ambiguous. The timeline presented by the prosecution is contradicted by credible witnesses. The medical testimony is disputed. While suspicion may fall on the accused, suspicion is not proof. We cannot say with confidence that the jury's verdict was safe. Wallace is freed. After 63 days in prison. 11 days before execution. It's the first time in British legal history that a murder conviction is overturned on the grounds that the evidence was simply too uncertain. It sets a precedent that still exists today. But here's what the judges don't say. They don't declare him innocent. They don't say he didn't do it. They say, we don't know. And that's not enough to hang a man. Wallace walks out of Wolverton Prison on May 19, 1931. Free. But not exonerated. Not vindicated. Just released. The aftermath of acquittal. Wallace returns to Liverpool. To the house at 29 Wolverton Street. The house where Julia died. He tries to go back to work for Prudential Insurance. But no one will open their doors to him. The company quietly forces him into early retirement. He's a free man. But Liverpool has already decided he's guilty. Windows are smashed. Murder is painted on his door. Children throw stones. He receives death threats. Within weeks, he moves out of Wolverton Street. He takes a small flat in Meadowside Road, trying to disappear. But the press won't let him. Reporters follow him. Photograph him. Ask for interviews. He declines them all. Wallace spends his final years alone. Reading. Writing. Playing chess by correspondence. He keeps a journal, hoping someday to publish his story, to clear his name. But his health deteriorates. Kidney disease. The stress of the trial, the imprisonment, the isolation. February 26, 1933. Less than 2 years after Julia's death. William Herbert Wallace dies in his flat. Alone. His final diary entry, "The world has judged me. I can only hope that history will be kinder." He's buried in Anfield Cemetery. Yards from Julia. No crowds attend his funeral. No one gives a eulogy. The case dies with him. Or so everyone thinks. But the mystery was just beginning its second life. Resolution and aftermath. The case that wouldn't die. 1933. Wallace is buried. The file is closed. The Liverpool police consider the matter settled. Guilty man freed on a technicality, then claimed by natural justice. But in London, in the libraries and drawing rooms of Britain's literary elite, something else is happening. The case is being resurrected. Not by detectives. By writers. The Golden Age obsession. Dorothy L. Sayers reads the trial transcripts in 1933. She's already famous, creator of Lord Peter Wimsey, master of the locked room mystery. She's constructed dozens of impossible crimes on paper. But the Wallace case stops her cold. She writes to fellow crime novelist Anthony Berkeley, "I've been studying the Liverpool case. It's the most perfect locked room I've ever encountered, and I cannot solve it. Neither way works. If Wallace did it, the timeline is impossible. If he didn't, everything else is impossible. It's maddening." Berkeley responds, "Perhaps that's because it's real. Reality doesn't have to make sense." Sayers becomes obsessed. She visits Liverpool. Walks the route Wallace took. Stands outside 29 Wolverton Street. Times the tram journey herself. She fills 3 notebooks with theories. None satisfy her. In 1936, she writes an essay, The Wallace Case, an exercise in uncertainty. Her conclusion? If this were fiction, my editor would reject it as too implausible. No reader would accept a mystery this contradictory. But it happened. And that's what makes it perfect. Raymond Chandler, the American crime novelist, reads about the case in 1945. He writes, The Wallace case is unbeatable. I've read everything about it, and I still can't decide. I change my mind every time I go through the evidence. That's never happened to me before. Agatha Christie never writes about it publicly. But in her private notebooks, found after her death, there are pages of Wallace timeline calculations. She's trying to solve it too. She can't. The case becomes a rite of passage for crime writers. Can you solve what Sayers, Christie, and Chandler couldn't? No one can. 1960s, the case reopens. True crime author Jonathan Goodman publishes The Killing of Julia Wallace in 1969. It's the first comprehensive book on the case. Goodman spends 5 years researching, interviewing surviving witnesses, accessing police files, walking the streets. He uncovers something. A name that was barely mentioned during the original investigation. Richard Gordon Perry. The Perry Theory. Richard Gordon Perry was 22 in 1931. He worked for Prudential Insurance, the same company as Wallace. He knew Wallace personally, had been to the house, knew the layout. He knew Julia. And here's what Goodman discovers. In the weeks after the murder, Perry's behavior was strange. He left Liverpool suddenly, moved to London, changed jobs multiple times. When questioned by police in 1931, he provided an alibi for the night of the murder. He was with friends. But Goodman tracks down those friends. Decades later, one admits, we lied. The police pressured us. They said Richard just needed an alibi to clear his name. We thought we were helping. But honestly, I don't know where he was that night. Goodman keeps digging. Perry had financial troubles in 1931. Gambling debts. He'd been suspected, but never charged, of embezzlement at Prudential. He knew Wallace played chess every Monday. Knew the club's phone number. And here's the critical detail. Perry's voice. Samuel Beattie, who took the Qualtrough phone call, said it wasn't Wallace's voice. But could it have been Perry's? Goodman tracks down the elderly Beattie in 1968. Mr. Beattie, I'm going to play you a recording. Tell me if you recognize the voice. It's a recording of Perry from a 1960s radio interview, strained, hurried, slightly high-pitched. Beattie listens. Goes pale. That's him. That's the Qualtrough caller. The Perry scenario. If Perry did it, here's how it works. Monday, January 19th, 7:15 p.m. Perry calls the chess club from the phone box. Disguises his voice slightly. Leaves the Qualtrough message, knowing it will lure Wallace out of the house the following night. Tuesday, January 20th, 7 p.m. Wallace leaves for Menlove Gardens. Perry goes to Wolverton Street. Julia knows him. Trusts him. Lets him in. Is William here? No, he's gone to Menlove Gardens. An appointment. Perry knows this. He created the appointment. Maybe Perry asks for money. Maybe he tries to rob the place. Maybe Julia discovers something, sees him taking cash from the box. She threatens to tell Wallace. Perry panics. He grabs the poker from the fireplace. 11 blows. He stages a robbery, takes a few pounds, not enough to look like serious theft. Wears Wallace's Macintosh to avoid blood spatter, then leaves it under the body. Locks the doors from inside using Julia's keys, then exits through the back, relatching it from outside. He's gone by 7:20 p.m. When Wallace returns at 8:45, Julia is already dead. The perfect frame. Wallace looks guilty. Perry walks free. But there's a problem. In 1980, radio producer Roger Wilkes tracks down Richard Gordon Perry. He's 71 years old. Living in North Wales. Broken. Alcoholic. Wilkes interviews him. Mr. Perry, there are people who believe you killed Julia Wallace. Perry's hands shake. I didn't. I swear to God I didn't. Then why did your alibi witnesses lie? They didn't lie. I asked them to confirm I was with them because I was somewhere I shouldn't have been. But not at Wolverton Street. I was with a married woman. I couldn't say that in 1931. It would have destroyed her. Who was she? I can't say. She's still alive. Wilkes presses. Perry won't name her. Did you make the Qualtro call? A long pause. No. Samuel Beatty identified your voice. He's wrong. Or misremembering. It's been 50 years. Where were you the night Julia died? I told the police. I was. Your alibi fell apart. Perry stands up. Interview over. I didn't kill her. But no one will ever believe me. Just like no one believed Wallace. This case destroys everyone it touches. 3 months later, Richard Gordon Perry dies. He never confesses. Never clears his name. Just like Wallace. The legal legacy. The Wallace case changes British law. Before 1931, the Court of Criminal Appeal almost never overturned jury verdicts in murder cases. Juries were considered infallible, 12 ordinary people, seeing the evidence, making a decision. But Wallace's case establishes a precedent. A conviction can be overturned if the evidence is too contradictory or uncertain, even if there was no legal error in the trial. It's called the unsafe verdict standard. It still exists today. Hundreds of cases since 1931 have been overturned using the Wallace precedent. Most recently, in 2003, appeals court judges cited R.V. Wallace when freeing a man convicted on entirely circumstantial evidence. The judge wrote, "We must be cautious about convicting on suspicion alone. As the Wallace case demonstrated, suspicion, however strong, is not proof." Julia Wallace's death created a legal safeguard that has saved innocent lives. It's a strange legacy. But it's something. The cultural haunting. The case embeds itself in British consciousness. It's referenced in novels. P.D. James uses it as inspiration for an unsuitable job for a woman. Ruth Rendell writes a short story, The Wrong Door, based on the locked room element. Kate Atkinson includes a fictionalized version in case histories. It appears in TV documentaries. BBC Time Watch, The Wallace Case, 1990. Channel 4 Real Crime, The Impossible Murder, 2002. Sky Crime British Murders, 29 Wolverton Street, 2018. Each generation re-examines it. Each generation comes to a different conclusion. In 2001, a Merseyside radio poll asks, was Wallace guilty? 53% say yes. 47% say no. Almost perfectly split. Even 70 years later, we cannot agree. Modern forensics, too late. In 2012, a cold case team from Liverpool John Moores University conducts a modern forensic review. Using 1931 crime scene photographs, autopsy reports, and witness statements, they apply contemporary methods. Blood spatter analysis. The 11 blows would have created cast-off spatter, blood flung from the weapon during each swing. It would have traveled 6 to 8 feet in all directions. The killer would have been covered, but Wallace had no blood on him. Conclusion: either Wallace changed clothes and hid them perfectly, or he didn't do it. Timeline reconstruction. Using modern GPS and tram schedules, they recreate Wallace's journey. From last confirmed sighting of Julia alive, 6:45 p.m. by the milk boy, to Wallace boarding the tram, 6:49 p.m. For minutes. It's theoretically possible, the lead investigator says, but only if Wallace ran home, committed the murder instantly, cleaned up in under 2 minutes, and ran back. No hesitation. No errors. No one seeing him. Possible? Technically. Probable? Voice analysis. Using the 1960s recording of Perry and attempting to compare it to descriptions of the Qualtro call. Inconclusive. Audio quality is too poor. Too many decades between recordings. Conclusion. Based on modern forensic standards, there is insufficient evidence to charge anyone. The case would likely not proceed to trial today. But that doesn't answer the question. It just confirms what we already knew. We don't know. The philosophical problem. Here's what the Wallace case ultimately reveals. Our justice system is built on a comforting lie. The lie that truth is discoverable. That if we investigate thoroughly enough, apply logic rigorously enough, examine evidence carefully enough, we'll know. Guilty or innocent. Binary. Certain. But Wallace shatters that. Because sometimes, the evidence genuinely points both ways. Sometimes, the truth is obscured not by lack of investigation, but by the fundamental ambiguity of reality. And when that happens, what do? The 1931 jury said, convict anyway. Suspicion is enough. The 1931 appeals court said, no. Uncertainty means acquittal. Both responses are unsatisfying. Convicting an uncertain man means potentially executing an innocent person. Freeing an uncertain man means potentially releasing a murderer. There's no good answer. Just the least bad option. The Wallace case forces us to confront the limits of knowledge. And that's terrifying. Because if we can't know in this case, with witnesses, physical evidence, timelines, and confessions all examined, how certain can we be in any case? 29 Wolverton Street today. The house still stands. It's been renovated, divided into flats. Current residents mostly don't know the history. But sometimes, late at night, people report footsteps in the hallway. A door that won't stay closed. Cold spots in the parlor. Is it Julia? Of course not. It's just an old house. Old pipes. Settling foundations. But the story persists. Because we need ghosts. We need hauntings. We need some evidence that the dead matter, that unsolved mysteries leave marks on the world. In 2019, a local Liverpool podcast host visits the house. She stands outside, recording. This is where it happened. January 20th, 1931. Julia Wallace died here. And we still don't know who killed her. 90 years later, and we still don't know. The pause. Maybe that's the real horror. Not the violence. The not knowing. What we're left with. 2 graves in Anfield Cemetery. Julia Wallace, died 1931. William Herbert Wallace, died 1933. Buried yards apart. No one visits them. The headstones are weathered, inscriptions fading. In another decade, they'll be illegible. The case files are stored in the British Library Crime Classics archive. Yellowed papers. Faded photographs. Testimony from people long dead. Students occasionally request them. Write dissertations. Publish articles. Each one concludes with some variation of, the truth may never be known. And that's where we are. A murder that might have been perfect. A husband who might have been innocent. A killer who might have escaped. Or a tragedy with no villain at all. Just bad timing, bad luck, and a justice system that demanded certainty where none existed. The final question. Do you want Wallace to be guilty? Think about it honestly. If he's guilty, the case makes sense. It's a clever murder, almost successful, foiled by good police work and judicial wisdom. Justice was nearly served. The system almost worked. If he's innocent, the case is a nightmare. An innocent man was nearly executed. A killer walked free. Julia's murder is unsolved forever. The system failed completely. Which is more comforting. Most people, when pressed, admit they want Wallace to be guilty. Because the alternative is too unsettling. It means chaos. Randomness. The possibility that bad things happen and no one is held accountable. We need neat endings. We need someone to blame. Even if we're not certain. Especially if we're not certain. And that's the most disturbing revelation of all. The Wallace case doesn't tell us who killed Julia Wallace. It tells us who we are. January 20th, 2031. 100 years will have passed. Everyone involved, Wallace, Julia, the investigators, the witnesses, the jury, will be dead for decades. The house on Wolverton Street will likely still stand. The case files will gather dust. And somewhere, someone will discover the story for the first time. They'll read the transcripts, study the timeline, examine the evidence. And they'll think, I can solve this. I can see what everyone else missed. They'll construct their theory, elegant, logical, convincing. And they'll be just as uncertain as everyone before them. Because the Wallace case isn't a puzzle to be solved. It's a mirror. It reflects our need for answers in a world that doesn't always provide them. Our need for justice in a system that's fundamentally imperfect. Our need for certainty in the face of irreducible mystery. Julia Wallace died violently in her parlor 93 years ago. Someone killed her. Someone knows what happened. But that someone is either dead or silent. And the rest of us are left with questions. Forever asking. Forever uncertain. Forever haunted by the possibility that some truths remain locked. In rooms we can never open,